In the summer of 1922, a young man named Nick Carraway moved from the Midwest to New York to learn the bond business. He rented a small house on Long Island, in a district called West Egg, a place known for its new money. Across the bay lay East Egg, home to the old rich, people whose families had been wealthy for generations. Nick's house was small and modest, but right next to it stood a huge mansion, owned by a man who was famous for the lavish parties he threw every weekend. His name was Jay Gatsby, though at that point, Nick didn't know much about him except the rumors that swirled around. Nick was related to Daisy Buchanan, who lived in East Egg with her husband, Tom Buchanan, a man of enormous wealth and arrogance. Tom had been a football star in college and carried himself as if the world still owed him admiration. Nick went to visit them one evening and was struck by the luxury of their home, the glowing gardens, the breeze through the white curtains, and the sense of charm that Daisy exuded. She was beautiful and soft-spoken, but there was something fragile and restless in her smile, something that seemed to hint at unhappiness beneath the surface. At dinner that night, Nick met Jordan Baker, a friend of Daisy's and a professional golfer with a cool, detached manner. During the evening, the phone rang, and Tom left the room to answer it. Daisy looked uncomfortable, and Jordan quietly told Nick that Tom had some woman in New York. It was clear that Daisy knew about the affair, but she acted as though nothing was wrong. The dinner continued in awkward politeness, and when Nick left, he felt that the Buchanans' lives were wrapped in wealth but empty at their core. As summer deepened, Nick settled into his small house and began to notice the strange happenings next door. Every weekend, Gatsby's mansion was filled with music, laughter, and lights that glowed into the early hours of the morning. Cars lined the driveway, people came from the city, and champagne flowed endlessly. Yet no one seemed to know who Gatsby really was. Rumors spread wildly. Some said he was a German spy, others that he had killed a man, or that he was an Oxford graduate. The mystery made him even more fascinating. Nick received an invitation to one of Gatsby's parties, something unusual, since most guests came uninvited. He arrived at the mansion feeling a little out of place among the extravagantly dressed strangers. The party was grand beyond imagination, an orchestra played jazz, people danced on marble steps, and waiters carried trays of cocktails through gardens lit like a fairy tale. Nick wandered around, looking for his host, but no one seemed to know where Gatsby was. Eventually, Nick found himself talking to a man who seemed unusually polite and attentive. As they chatted about the war, Nick suddenly realized that this was Gatsby himself. Gatsby was not what he expected. He was young, handsome, and surprisingly modest in manner. He had an easy smile and cowl. After that afternoon at Nick's cottage, Gatsby and Daisy began to see each other regularly. At first, their meetings were secret and full of excitement, like a dream coming true after years of waiting. Gatsby seemed to live in a state of wonder, as though he could hardly believe Daisy was real. He stopped throwing his famous parties, dismissed many of his servants to avoid gossip, and spent his time entirely focused on her. Nick noticed the change. The music at Gatsby's mansion had gone silent, the gardens empty, the laughter gone. The grand house that once attracted half of New York now stood quiet, its lights dim except for the few that glowed in Daisy's presence. Gatsby's dream, which for years had burned in his heart, was now within reach. Yet, as Nick watched them together, he sensed that Gatsby wanted more than Daisy could give. He wanted to relive the past, to erase everything that had happened since Louisville, the war, her marriage, Tom, and time itself. One day, when Nick visited, Gatsby confessed this. "Can't repeat the past," he said, almost angrily. "Why, of course you can." He truly believed that love could turn back time, that he could bring back the world where Daisy loved only him. Nick tried to tell him that things were different now, that people change, but Gatsby wouldn't listen. To him, Daisy was still the perfect girl from the summer of 1917, and he believed she could be his again completely. Meanwhile, Tom Buchanan began to grow suspicious. Daisy's behavior had changed, she was distracted, happier in a way that confused him. One afternoon, Tom, Daisy, Jordan, Gatsby, and Nick gathered at the Buchanan house in East Egg. The heat that day was unbearable, the kind of heavy, suffocating heat that makes tempers rise. Daisy suggested they all go into the city to cool off, and Tom agreed, though the tension between him and Gatsby was thick in the air. They drove in separate cars. Tom took Nick and Jordan in Gatsby's yellow car, while Gatsby drove Daisy in Tom's blue coupe. The cars sped down the highway toward Manhattan, dust rising behind them. In the city, they rented a suite at the Plaza Hotel, a grand place with tall ceilings and white curtains that hung limp in the still air. They ordered cold drinks, but the mood was anything but relaxed. Tom began to question Gatsby, his voice sharp and mocking. He asked where Gatsby really came from, how he made his money, and what right he had to call himself an Oxford man. Gatsby tried to remain calm, but Tom pressed harder, revealing that he had investigated Gatsby's background. He accused Gatsby of being a bootlegger, of running illegal liquor through drugstores and shady businesses. Gatsby didn't deny it outright, but he stood his ground, saying only that he loved Daisy and that she never loved Tom. The words hung in the room like a thunderclap. Daisy turned pale. Gatsby asked her to tell Tom the truth, that she had never loved him, that she had always loved only Gatsby. For a moment, Nick went home that night filled with unease. The world around him felt empty, as if all the brightness and music of the summer had faded into silence. Gatsby was still outside Daisy's house, watching, waiting for a sign that she would come to him. But no light appeared in her window. As dawn began to break, Gatsby finally went home, tired and heartsick, though he didn't admit it. When Nick visited him in the morning, Gatsby's face looked pale and drawn, but his eyes still held a kind of desperate hope. He told Nick that nothing had happened after he left Daisy's house. She hadn't sent a message or come out to see him. Gatsby believed she would still call him later, maybe that afternoon, and that they could run away together. Nick didn't know what to say. He wanted to shake Gatsby, to make him see that Daisy wasn't going to leave Tom. But Gatsby's dream had lived too long inside him, it had become stronger than truth itself. They sat together in Gatsby's garden, the once glittering mansion now strangely quiet. Gatsby talked about the past, about the first time he had met Daisy. He told Nick how amazed he had been by her beauty, her voice, and her charm, and how he had fallen for her completely. When he went to war, he had dreamed of her every day. He had come back poor and unknown, and she had married Tom. But he never stopped believing that if he became rich, if he built the right kind of life, she would come back to him. Everything he had done, the parties, the house, the clothes, had been for her. Nick listened, feeling both admiration and sorrow. Gatsby's dream was beautiful in its way, but it was also tragic. He had built it on an illusion, on a memory that could never return. Still, Nick couldn't help but respect his faith in it, even if it was doomed. Before leaving, Nick said quietly, "They're a rotten crowd. You're worth the whole damn bunch put together." It was the only compliment he ever gave Gatsby, and Gatsby seemed to understand that it came from the heart. That afternoon, George Wilson, Myrtle's husband, was wandering in a haze of grief and madness. He had spent the night searching for answers, and someone, perhaps Tom Buchanan, had told him that the yellow car belonged to Gatsby. Wilson, driven by sorrow and revenge, made his way to West Egg. He found Gatsby lying on an air mattress in his pool, trying to enjoy the water one last time before autumn came. Gatsby had decided to take a swim, even though he hadn't used the pool all summer. The house was silent, the servants were inside. The sky was clear, and the leaves were beginning to fall. No one knows exactly what happened next, but the gardener later heard 2 shots. When Nick arrived, Gatsby was floating face down in the water, dead, and Wilson's body lay nearby in the grass. The murder had been quick. Wilson had shot Gatsby, then turned the gun on himself. The great mansion was suddenly a place of horror, the dream completely destroyed. Nick was left to handle everything alone.